All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to another episode of the OpenShift Administrators Office Hours here on OpenShift TV. I am Chris Short, executive producer of OpenShift TV, and something is very loud in my background. I'm sorry.
Is that your own echo in the background?
That is my own echo. I was listening to the channel yesterday while I was on PTO. Yes, I do that. It was just on in the background while I was going through and sorting mail and such yesterday, cleaning up my office as it had become a disaster zone. But it also gave me
cleaning up and decorating. I see.
Yes, it also gave me the opportunity to, as my wife was putting out Christmas decorations, I decided to put out my own here in the office. So, just to give everybody kind of the full spiel here, there's one of those old school ceramic Christmas trees, right? Like your grandma used to have. I love those things growing up as a kid. You know, it had little lights that you could take in and out. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So that's over there on top of my 16-port switch. Nice ceramic thing. It won't cause any interference. It's got a little Yoda stocking hanging above the baby Yoda. And then you can't really see it. And like I could move my desk up and down, so you could, but I'm not going to waste the time of doing that. There is a Santa Land Here sign flashing. It's a big arrow thing. It's just at the top.
I see
of
the blinking lights. Yeah.
And surprisingly, it was very cold where we put it in the basement, and the lights have gotten brighter as they've been on today, right? Like today was the first day they've been on, and I was like, they're really dim. And it's because it's cold in the basement down here.
Well, so, it is supposed to warm up there in Michigan, right?
You know? Yeah. So, I mean, like, it is 66 or just went up to 67 here at my desk. It's 64 in the basement as a whole, but it is going to get up to 66 outside. So I was in a hoodie and everything when I started this morning, very early before sunrise, and I will be probably having the windows open here by the end of the day. So yeah, wonderful November Michigan weather we have. Yes. How are things in your neck of the woods, Andrew?
Well, you notice I'm in a hoodie, so
right.
You know, cold. I'm from the South. Anything below 60 degrees is automatically cold.
Well, like, yeah, but like I'm from the South too, but I've adjusted. You can do it too. I believe in you.
But I'm still in the South.
Oh, well, I guess I had to.
I didn't move to Southern Canada.
Southern Canada, nice. That's true. Canada is south of here for me. I do have to drive south to get to Canada. Yeah. So, OpenShift Administrators Office Hours. I'm sorry, we've been chatting. I have not kept an eye of the chat while we were talking. But we are here talking about what today?
Yeah, so for anybody new to this particular show, this is the OpenShift Administrators Office Hours. So this is a Ask Me Anything style hour devoted to OpenShift administrators. So whether you want to talk about the installation process or operators or all the various features, functionality, etc., or anything in between and or above that, we're more than happy to chat about that. Do our best to answer questions. If we don't know the answer, then we'll track down the right people and get those answers.
Yes.
So a couple of interesting things have happened recently. One thing that I can mention, but I have no knowledge to speak beyond that, is I did see that RHEL 8.3 was released. So
RHEL 8.3 was released.
Yeah.
I am not quite sure what it includes but it is out. So there's all kinds of updates available for you now.
Yeah. So I will say that as far as I know, that will not, CoreOS will not rebase to 8.3 because 8.2 is an EUS release for RHEL.
Right.
So CoreOS will stay on the 8.2 chain for a while.
Yeah, like the extended user support. Is that what EUS stands for? I'm terrible with acronyms.
Extended
update support. Okay. Anyways, yes, the EUS versions are what we like to base CoreOS on because, well, it makes it easier on us.
Not just us. Hopefully, everyone.
Hopefully, well, when I say us, I mean. All of us. All of us. You watching right now, us, the people out here at Red Hat, yeah, everybody. So yeah.
So I do want to take a moment and actually I'll point out a couple of things. So one, revisiting a couple of topics from last week. So one of our audience members was asking about the immutability of CoreOS.
Yes.
And it turns out that this is a rather large topic. And
it's a sticky subject, we've learned.
Yes. So I am working in the background, and I'm hoping to have, if not the product manager and an engineer, at least one of those people be able to come on and have a conversation around that topic and what immutability means, whether or not we use it in the right way, whether or not we interpret it the right way, and how that applies against CoreOS and OpenShift. So stay tuned. Hopefully we'll have a lot more information on that coming up in one of the next few shows.
Yeah, wholly immutable. It's probably what we should title that, and it would be WH. Not, but yes, that's my quick idea for the show title on that one. Should be a good show because yes, we definitely do have the question of, is this fully immutable? And that is never really.
And what exactly does that mean? And
right, like
what is immutable enough? And so it's a broad topic, and one that's, like I said, we're working to organize it, get the right people to be able to come on and be able to talk about that, and we'll advertise it appropriately so that you'll know ahead of time.
Yeah.
So the other thing from last week, and one of the things that I talked about and was hoping to show was with OpenShift 4.6, we sort of quietly released a new way of doing static IP assignment for the user provisioned infrastructure or pre-existing infrastructure installation method on vSphere. So I did a very quick, let me see if this works. And of course it failed miserably because that's life.
that's life for Andrew Sullivan.
So I did a little bit more research. I did a little, a few more tests, etc. And I want to revisit that topic, and hopefully we can get it working today. I'm using a completely different vSphere environment. This one kindly provided by my friends over at VMware.
Ooh.
So we will see what that looks like and what happens there. But all of that being said, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, this is an Ask Me Anything. This is meant to be for you, for our audience. So if you have something on your mind, doesn't matter if it's related to whatever the topic we happen to be discussing is, please, by all means, bring it up, ask the question. If we, like I said, just like last week, I can give you an off the top of my head answer for things like immutability, but we'll track down the answer and we'll really, find out what that means.
And to kind of, drive home the point of, why we're kind of doing this show and everything is to actually, engage with y'all better. So we do have a Discord associated with like our live streaming efforts. So if you want to join that and engage in the conversation there, that's fine. You can ask questions here live. If you're afraid of, maybe the, group exposure of your intelligence, that's totally understandable. Feel free to, DM me or Andrew, and we can get an answer to your question. You can always reach me by email at cshort@redhat.com. But yes, this is the time. Ask your questions, fire away. We have an idea for, a show right now, what we're going to look at, but we have many questions coming in. And JP Data is reminding us there are no dumb questions, just dumb answers.
I was going to go with dumb answerers.
Yes, I was going to kind of like tweak and say the two of us might not always have the answer.
What's that? The chasm or the trough of disillusionment, right? The whole you start off and and you think everything, and then every time I was talking with Peter Lauterbach, one of our product managers, about OpenShift, and OpenShift is like a fractal. Like every time you learn something new about it, it turns into like a whole new set of things.
Yes.
And when you go and try and investigate one of those, it turns into a whole new set of things. What was the one yesterday? I was asking about how the cluster autoscaler decides which machine set to scale.
Wow.
And it turns into this whole thing.
It's an algorithm now, right? Like,
yeah, well, it's so they use a I don't know if it's literally a simulator, but essentially it simulates adding a node to the cluster from the machine set and what that would do to the scheduler.
It simulates that and then makes a decision.
Yeah. So it's, and I assume this is all in code, right? It's not actually provisioning anything or anything.
Right. Yeah.
It looks at the machine set. It looks at the properties of the nodes that would be provisioned inside of there, and basically makes sure that they are able to meet the needs of the pod. So, hey, do I need, so say, for example, the pod is requesting a node that has a specific label or a specific piece of hardware, a GPU, for example.
Right.
If it doesn't meet that, if there's no machine set, or the machine set doesn't meet that requirement, obviously it's not even considered. But if there's more than one that's eligible, it basically simulates what would the cluster look like if I add this node, how would that affect the scheduling, and then make some sort of decision based off of that. And I haven't gotten past that. Like, what's the next step? If I have 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 machine sets that all could potentially work, how do I choose which one? So it's one of those, you dig down the hole and keep digging and keep digging and keep digging and keep digging.
Yes, you will find many rabbit holes in OpenShift and Kubernetes in general, right? Like, just what was it? I remember there was a KubeCon, Justin Garrison of Cloud Native Infrastructure, O'Reilly book fame. He was using balloons to simulate like different APIs as part of the Kubernetes cluster, and it was just like, wow, this is really complex, right? Like inflating and deflating like balloons to like indicate like this is expanding, this is contracting, this is busy, this is not, right? Like, yeah, it was just like, wow, this is a lot harder than we think it is.
Yeah. I've learned a lot about the scheduler recently, trying to write a sizing guide. So it's been interesting. Yeah. So I do see that we have a question from Naz. And I will ask you to take that one first, because sure. I'm curious to your perspective. So what does an OpenShift infrastructure specialist look like? What skill set would they have?
An OpenShift infrastructure specialist, right? Like, you're asking basically to have like a Kubernetes administrator with knowledge of OpenShift, essentially, right? So Kubernetes, so when I look at Kubernetes, I think there are 2 paths, and I think CNCF kind of agrees with that, and I'll put on my CNCF ambassador hat for the time being. There's the CKA and the CKAD certifications, right? And one is for developers, aka people consuming Kubernetes, and one is for administrators, people maintaining Kubernetes. And I think we have similar exams. I forget the numbers and everything so don't please quote me on any of that. But the first decision you have to make is, are you consuming Kubernetes as part of your day-to-day work, or are you actually maintaining Kubernetes? And when I say Kubernetes, OpenShift, they're synonymous in this instance. So if you're saying OpenShift infra specialist, I am assuming you mean maintaining that CKA part. So I would say you would want to have skills like understanding of Linux, understanding of containers, understanding of some basic networking, right? Like, you're going to have to know some of the things that Kubernetes does kind of under the hood and how that all works together, DNS, and then all the bits of etcd are always fun. So you kind of learn along the way. I don't know anybody that maintains OpenShift that didn't start from, I know little to nothing, and kind of learned as they went, right? Like, yes, they got training, but they weren't like, oh, I'm a Kubernetes expert, and then now I'm using OpenShift, right? Like, that didn't happen in that order. Right?
Yeah. So I'm here we go, skills paths. So I'm bringing up the Red Hat certification path. So I have a similar perspective as you of there's 2 aspects, right? There's if we're talking strictly infrastructure, there's how to connect to, how to manage, how to interact with the infrastructure that Kubernetes and OpenShift is running on top of from a Kubernetes/OpenShift perspective, right? So a good example to pick on is things like networking,
Right.
It's easy for us, especially, I'm an old virtualization guy, right? Hey, virtualization, we always have like 6 network adapters, and 2 of them are a bond mode 1 that is used for management, and 4 of them are an LACP bond that's used for VM traffic, and maybe there's 2 others that are bonded together for storage traffic and all this other stuff. Okay, well,
you don't know what any of that means, do you?
Yeah, of course I do. So there's an aspect of understanding, does that apply, because Kubernetes is different than virtualization, et cetera. There's an aspect of, okay, let's say that it does. How do I actually implement that? And
Right.
OpenShift is different than basically everything else as well, because of CoreOS and how we manage CoreOS, and
Right.
understanding machine configs and all that other stuff. And then to your point, so there's actually interacting with, managing, controlling, configuring how OpenShift interacts with and configures the hardware. And then there is all of the things inside of OpenShift that make up that core stuff.
Right.
So let's see. I want to open, and I want.
Oh boy. You're pulling up slides. People are going to ask you to share them.
We'll see. This one should have it, I think, even though it's a copy. Oh no, this is one that I broke. Let me find the right presentation. This will do. So when we look at, because what I want is this graphic right here.
There you go.
So when we look at, what are the things that as an administrator of OpenShift that I need to care about? Well, it more or less falls from this horizontal line, the cluster services, downward. But there's also bits and pieces of these other 3 columns that are relevant as an OpenShift administrator. So if you look at developer services, that's generally things that the application team, the development team, they're going to care about. Application services, similarly, these are, although there is a touch, right, a tie-in to the administrator, because these are often consumed via operators from Operator Hub. Platform services is a mixed bag, right? So things like serverless,
right.
Implementing serverless, deploying serverless is on the administrator. Consuming it is on the development team. Same thing with service mesh, right? Same thing with CI/CD pipelines. So that's kind of a mixed bag. But all of these cluster services things, kind of the core platform features, functionality, like you were talking about, logging, routing, registry. If you're using OpenShift virtualization, right? All of those things fall onto the administrator to understand how they work, how they interact, how to troubleshoot, etc.
Yeah. And that's why we have, quote, operators. I'm wearing the operator framework t-shirt today, obviously. And a lot of our operators are codified knowledge, right? Like to maintain certain things inside OpenShift. So a lot of times, if something's broken, you go look at the operator and hit redeploy. And like, that's me. I don't do a lot of deep dive troubleshooting, right? When it comes, I want to know what broke if it's a persistent problem, but if it's a one-off thing, kill it and start it over, done, right? That's kind of
there's
my thing.
I was having a conversation with somebody yesterday or the day before about what is the quote unquote correct way to administer OpenShift? Do you because OpenShift and Kubernetes, right, are cloud native platforms, do you treat the platform itself as cloud native, i.e. disposable? Or do you expect that platform to have some level of resiliency? Is it to the same level that we expect our, for example, virtualization platforms, where we're expecting to get, 4, 5, 6 nines out of a virtualization platform? Or is it somewhere in between? Should we target 3 or 4 nines, with our Kubernetes platform and let the applications, figure it out from there? And the real answer is there is no answer. It comes down to almost always the applications. But you also encounter a lot of, for lack of a better term, zealotry around. You remember you were involved very early on, Chris, with CNCF and all of that. I was at the very first CNCF meeting where there was an actual debate on whether or not persistent volumes even needed to exist. right? Because it's Kubernetes, right? They're
Right.
cloud native applications. Why do they need persistence? Everything
Right.
is ephemeral.
Yeah.
So it's a spectrum.
It is a spectrum.
So let's see. Let's catch up on chat a little bit.
Yeah. So thank you to Lalan. Dropped that infographic in. Appreciate
which is
that.
the infographic that I have up on the screen here.
Yeah.
It is a good one. You can kind of see and you can look at each one of those courses and what's going to be covered to get an idea of the skill sets that we are, or at least our learning people, expect folks to have when they achieve those certifications. JP Date, I did bring up that case number in the background, so I'll take a look at it and I'll shoot you a message after the stream if I can figure something out there. Is it possible to install cluster logging operator in code-ready containers? So
I kind of responded to that.
Did you? Okay.
Yeah, I said if you have the hardware, right? Like.
Yeah. So and that's more or less my response as well. Of logging is it's heavyweight. Like
right.
It consumes a lot of resources. I think Elasticsearch wants like 2 CPUs and 4 or 8 gigabytes of RAM just for a single instance.
Yeah, just for Elasticsearch, right?
Yeah. So it's technically possible, as far as I know. In full disclosure, I haven't tried. You just need to make sure that the virtual machine that CRC deploys has enough resources for that.
Yeah. 64 megs of RAM, 8 cores. That should hopefully work. Where does or doesn't Istio fit in OpenShift? Well, we have a service mesh operator. It uses Istio, and it would provide the same level of service meshiness as Istio would. And Istio under the hood is Envoy. So, yeah, that kind of answers that question.
Yeah, Istio is in OpenShift. It is it is the service mesh if you choose to deploy it.
Yes. You may choose to just deploy Envoy if you want, right? Like the choice is yours. You could take the easy way, hit the service mesh operator, or you can take whatever route you choose. That's the beauty of cloud native infrastructure.
I see somebody asking, what is Envio? Was that
that was the
Envoy?
I think Envoy. Yeah. It's a typo.
Okay. I was going to say Envio. I'm not familiar with.
I wasn't familiar with it either. That's why I asked. Like, what is that? And Roger Moore or Ragamore, however you say that, it says Envoy and Istio was the response after.
Got it. Yeah, 64 gigs of RAM and 8 CPUs. I would think that's probably enough. But as always, double check. You'll figure it out by how much swapping and how much otherwise it'll refuse to schedule after a while.
Yeah, just keep an eye on the pods, like just the pod watch all, and HTOP. those will tell you everything you need to know. If you got stuff that's like waiting for resources or like unschedulable, that'll tell you.
You can also use the kubectl top node top commands.
There's also that'll give you a like per node, but since it's CRC it'd be one node. So you can get the info there. Yeah. So for your large cluster, you could see all that. And for your CRC cluster, the last time I tried CRC was on the actual streaming rig before it became the streaming rig. So that was May of this year. I know I've installed it on my Mac a couple times and like, yes, it works. Like through the IDE VS Code, we have an extension to actually put CRC on your machine. You can just do that through VS Code, go through the extension store for that. And then you could, I could run it back in May, before May, on 32 gigs, on i3. So 4 cores.
Four cores? I tried to install it to my old Mac and it.
Oh, no. The old Mac hardware is not going to cut it.
The thing was sad, so it didn't work. I haven't tried since then. I should try, but I tend to just deploy a full cluster. You can see the one up on my screen is in Amazon.
Yeah. And yeah, like I deploy a cluster here in the house, right? Like all on an actual pizza box server. Is the operator compliance launched? or is, I'm assuming, let me rephrase this.
Compliance
Hi,
operator,
is
yeah.
the compliance operator launched on OCP 4.6? Could it be run on OCP 4.4 as well? That's a tough one. I don't think so. And why don't I think so is because of some of the changes that came into Force 5 and 6, right? Like it made that operator possible, I feel like. If you hit install,
wow, we did not fill out any of the metadata here.
We did a really bad job of that. Hit install, see what it does.
Make this bigger. 4.6, yeah. So it's only available in the 4.6 update channel.
Yeah. So it looks like for now it's just 4.6. I would imagine we'd want a little more about, like, there's got to be more going on there, I feel like, and we should probably get back to you on that one, to be honest with you, because there's no metadata, there's no nothing, right? Like there should be something there. Does your cluster just not pull it, maybe?
No, well, I was looking to see if it's in this repo, if there is a composable. Nope. So it's not listed in here. So I was going to look at the CSV, for the operator and see what's listed there. Although we can kind of get an idea of what it's going to look like because it's only available for 4.6.
Right. Yeah.
So that's.
If you're not familiar with like how certain OC commands match up to certain screens, or certain views in the UI, right? Like this is a very much like looking at the CSV view here when you're doing the install of an operator.
Yep. Yeah. So, and CSV, which is, cluster service version?
Yeah.
If I remember correctly. So it's the descriptor for how to install an operator. So it includes, and we can flip over here and pick on one of these. I'll pick on Aqua. So if I look at
they do things
their cluster service version here, and if we scroll down and look at all of these, right? So one, you can see the description. The Aqua security operator runs within Kubernetes. And if we were to look and do an Aqua, if I can spell. So if we look at this, yes, I know it's a community operator. See, the Aqua security operator runs, well, this says within an OpenShift cluster, but that's because I'm looking at upstream community operators here, not community operators. So take a step back. The disconnect there. So if you look at this GitHub repo, github.com/operator-framework/community-operators, this is where there's two directories inside of here. There's community operators. So this will be all of the operators that you find in the OpenShift GitHub, or OpenShift operator hub, that are labeled as community. Like you see, this one says community. So it comes from this repo. Upstream community operators are all of the operators that you see listed on Operator Hub. I can't talk and type at the same time. OperatorHub.io. So the upstream community operators, there's no testing, no validation, no checking that they work with OpenShift. So
they are upstream.
Yeah, and classic example, right? They could be running as root, which of course doesn't work inside of OpenShift.
Right.
Whereas the community operators, which are found inside of OpenShift, have very basic checking to make sure that they are going to work inside of OpenShift. So things like they don't run as root, but they can use any base image that they want. So I'm not going to pick on any of these because I don't think it's listed inside of there, but a certified operator, we require that they use UBI, for example, or a rel base image. Whereas a community operator, we don't. So that's the difference between those, and that's where you see these come up. So back to what I was saying before, right? We can look at the CSV here, and let's come up here to Aqua, and we'll look at 102 and the cluster service version. So you see Aqua security operator runs within an OpenShift cluster. Aqua security operator runs within an OpenShift cluster. Right. So that's our metadata that gets displayed inside of the GUI.
Yeah.
As we scroll down all the way through here. Oops. I got a little trigger.
You got a little trigger happy, huh?
With the mouse buttons.
Yeah.
As we scroll down through here,
muscle spasm.
the important thing is this install. And this is what is telling it, here's the service account that you're gonna create. Here's all of the permissions that it's going to need. Same thing at the cluster level. And this is what's needed to deploy the operator into the cluster so that the operator can do its job. And down here is our deployment.
Yeah.
So that instantiates the operator in the cluster, and then the operator will have a whole separate set of things that it creates when it goes to deploy an instance of whatever application it's managing. All right, so
Christian's making me ask about candy.
It is yes, nougat, the
and then there's
stuff.
Then there's the NuGet that's like the Windows development thing, which is like package management.
Yeah, in NuGet.
Yeah.
So let me switch back. If you saw, I had a Windows desktop up earlier. This is I'm remoted into a remote host. So as I'm jumping backwards to the vSphere static IP stuff. So I have gone through the process of creating a UPI or staging a UPI cluster here. So really, I have quite literally followed the documentation.
Good for you.
And I try to do that. Doesn't always happen. So I've basically followed the documentation here, right? I went through, I created the install config.yaml. So there's our, an example install config.yaml. I created the, nope, don't need a proxy. So from there, I did the create manifests. I removed the machines, right? I did all of the other things that we ask of here, created our ignition configs, blah, 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 created our append bootstrap that will be used to point the bootstrap machine at its actual ignition file. Note that you can bypass that now. If you create a custom ISO or a custom image, you can actually add that directly to the image if you want to. Created the base 64s, and then used the OVA to clone out a bunch of instances. So you can see here I imported the OVA, lovingly known as CoreOS, and then cloned it out for each one of my instances. So I've got Bootstrap, the 3 computes, the 3 control plane nodes here. Being UPI, see I'm very simply using an HA proxy VM as my load balancer, as well as my web host for that ignition file. And then I have a RHEL 8 jump host that I'm using to actually interact with these things, run the installer, etc. So at this point, what I have done, so I went in and for each one of these VMs, nope, not you. I went to configure vApp options. And you can see I have this ignition config data encoding base 64 along with the actual data. So this is the base 64 ignition config for a compute node, right? So at this point, I've done everything exactly like you would expect for any other UPI deployments. However, previously, prior to OpenShift 4.6, because I deploy this with the OVA and I'm using these OVA or vApp properties, right, I would have to rely on DHCP to give me IP addresses.
Right.
So 4.6, we made that change. Again, I say it was quiet because it's not actually in the, so you can't tell here, but I'm on the release notes page, as opposed to over here where I'm on the installing vSphere, right, documentation page. So for whatever reason, it's not in the section of documentation that it should be. I know there's at least 2 docs BZs to fix that, but it's in the release notes where we can do static IP configuration by adding this particular field. So last week when I tried to do this, I literally edited the virtual machine and I copied and pasted this line.
Yeah. And
I was looking at it and I saw an internal email also asking about this. I think the issue is that line is not valid.
That's never happened to me before.
I know. So, and if we compare it to up here, right, even up here in this, which this is the valid documentation, or it matches what's in the other part of the documentation, you see that we're missing things like there's no host name out here. Right. There's no interface out here. Like, so it's missing a couple of fields.
Things. Yeah.
So what I've done is basically I've filled in all of that information accurately, at least for one of the VMs. So if we look at the bootstrap here, and if I go to edit settings, VM options advanced, and scroll down here to configuration parameters, select edit configuration, and then scroll all the way down to the bottom. We have this guestinfo.afterburn.initRD.network-kargs.
Nice.
And there I have my IP kernel arguments.
Name servers, all the fun stuff.
Right. So the way that we do this in the documentation is with a whole bunch of commands.
Yeah.
So we have these govc, so govc commands that we use to change the virtual machine, control plane 0, and then we set our particular value and we're good to go. So I haven't done that for all of these guys yet. So let me go ahead and do that. And hopefully that all took. I'm going to trust that it did. It's been a long time since I used putty.
Oh, putty.
So now we'll let it go through and update each one of our virtual machines here. And if I switch down here and expand this, we can see that it reconfigured each one of our virtual machines.
Nice.
And if I look at one of those virtual machines, just as I did before, just to validate and check, VM options, advanced, edit configuration, scroll all the way down here to the bottom, we've got this IP address configuration inside of here.
Cool.
All right, so it should work. We should be able to just turn everything on and it'll do its thing, right?
Should work.
So let's do exactly that. And we'll
You haven't tested this, have you?
No, I haven't.
Okay, cool.
Start up each one of these guys. And what's the worst that happens?
It fails.
So let's clear that. OpenShift install. Wait for, can't type and talk. So we'll do a wait for bootstrap complete with a log level of debug. We can see that we're waiting for the bootstrap to come up and initialize the first set of APIs. So let's open our web console and see what's happening here. So effectively, what I would expect to see, which I expected to see last week and it didn't work, is that when it finishes booting, we will have our IP address, which this one will be 6.20, if I recall. So we'll have our IP address set correctly from the time it boots and ever onward. Hopefully, that's the goal.
Yeah.
So one thing to note: this is an VMware SDDC instance, so it's running on vSAN and all kinds of other fancy stuff. So for anybody who has something like that, like a VCF deployment, this is hopefully familiar to you, or at least it looks a little bit like what you would expect.
A little bit like you would expect.
Yeah, I've never actually had enough hardware to do VCF or anything like that, right? Because you need, I think it's 3 or 4 nodes for the control cluster and then 3 nodes for the workload clusters.
Right.
I've never had that much hardware since VCF has been a thing.
Well, you know, it's a lot of hardware.
So there it's saying the network is unreachable. 6.15.80.80 bootstrap.ignition. So that should be right. Are you reporting anything here? No IP addresses.
Okay. Oh, it's changing.
Yeah, well, this is a control plane node, or excuse me, a worker node. Let's start the control plane nodes. So let's see what happens with those guys. But I'm not expecting. We'll launch the web console. I'm trusting you to keep an eye on the chat, by the way.
Oh yeah, no, I'm keeping an eye on it. Isn't there a hyper-converged version
of VCF?
I don't know. Isn't there a hyperconverged version? I feel like there always is.
So yeah, VCF, so VMware Cloud Foundation, is a package of software that has certified hardware to go along with it. So there's a bunch of hardware vendors that have those. Effectively, VCF is the combination of vSphere, vSAN, NSX, and vRealize. So the goal being,
that's a lot of
as
V's.
it is, well, it's VMware. So the goal being, right, I have my control plane cluster that's basically all of those things get deployed to. I have the SDDC manager that orchestrates all of that, and then I create workload clusters that do the same thing. It orchestrates deploying and integrating all of these various components. So the end result is ideally, hopefully, the goal being, I want to I want to have all of the VMware portfolio integrated for me. As the administrator, I don't want to have to go through that process of deploying and configuring NSX and all of those services. Instead, I say, SCDC manager, go deploy me a new workload cluster. And after however long it takes to deploy, it's done, it's there, and I can begin deploying workload to it. So this is, if you are familiar with the VMware the VMware reference architecture for OpenShift. No, I can't think of the name of it.
I just read it last week.
VVD, the VMware Validated Design.
There you go.
So there is a VVD for OpenShift, and those VVDs are built on top of what are effectively VCF workload domains. And I'll post a link to that inside of the chat here.
Thank you.
So yeah, that's effectively what we're looking at, or what we're trying to do here, is deploy into that. What I don't know is why this isn't working. So I know that the bootstrap is there. I know that that is 192.168.6.15. Where are you, bootstrap? 192.168.6.15. 8080 bootstrap.ign. Did I spell that right?
I can't see what you're typing. Bootstrap.ign.
Yeah, so it seems right. So I'm guessing
right.
it could be something with the network didn't get configured correctly, so it wasn't able to.
It's always the network.
It's always DNS, I thought.
Or that.
So another thing we can check here.
You always blame the network guys, and then
always
it's always
blame
DNS.
the network. This guy, we're connected to VM network. Yep, that's correct. Connected to VM network. That's correct.
OSI, is it plugged in? Yes. As I was mentioning prior to the call, prior to the show starting, I had to replace all my network gear this weekend because layer 1, it happens. Yeah.
So yeah, I got nothing on why this isn't able to connect. Aside from it could be yet another typo or error in my configuration here. So let's extract this and double check it against the documentation, because documentation is our friend.
If it's right.
Why you got to caveat it like that?
Because it would not be the first time I've thought a bug for docs. Is it SE Linux? Probably not. It should be configured correctly, I thought.
Yeah, it shouldn't. I can pull it up separately, right? So I can browse to it from here, and you can see here's our bootstrap. So one thing I'm wondering about is maybe this interface name isn't correct. EN01.
Oh, that'll do it. Because if I remember correctly, CoreOS uses like ENS3, blah, 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 blah. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember what the interface name is, and I don't think we can connect to it.
You you would see it at like boot, basically. So if you scroll up far enough, you'd see it eventually. Depending upon how back your scroll goes.
Let's see. How far back can we go? Oh, don't do that to me.
Oh, did it?
Yeah, it jumped back down because it. So, by the way, Linux, it's a terminal like this, you can do shift page up.
Yeah.
Shift page down to move around, if you didn't know that.
But it looks like it doesn't have it.
I can't see because it keeps jumping back down.
Wait, are you like stuck in like a shift page up loop or something?
No, well, when I go back up to the top, it then refreshes. It adds another log entry at the bottom.
That's right. So it jumps back down to the bottom. That is hilarious.
It'll eventually time out. I don't remember what the timeout is here. And
15
then,
minutes, I think.
It'll stop. Yeah.
We only have 13 though, so you can't wait for it to time out.
Yeah, I know. So, anyways, apparently, and I'm going to guess that it was because I did just guess on which interface name to use. I think I actually pulled that out of the docs, if I remember correctly. So, well, I'll have to double check where are my docs here.
Yeah, I mean,
that's why they didn't.
Is your system saying name interfaces as the docs? Eek. Don't know.
Yeah, and it has changed before. I think it was like OCP 4.2 to 4.3. It changed.
Right.
Let's see, interface. Yep. Okay. Interface. Yep.
I'm trying to get to my Fedora node.
So, but it appears to have worked otherwise. It's just that's, what's the thing about making an assumption? It makes an ass out of you and me.
That's for sure.
Or in this case, me.
Yeah. I mean, assumptions are the devil.
So Nemo, do you even need to use the interface name? I don't think so if it's a default install, or if it only has one network adapter.
If it has one network interface, I think you could skip it. Yeah.
Yeah. And we can try that real quick. In fact, let's do that.
Let's
turn off all these guys.
Thank you, server.
And then we can clone a new one.
Fun. I apologize for any child sounds in the background. All of my nephews are over.
I'm so offended.
I know you're offended. In these hard times of keeping children entertained, I would expect nothing less.
You know me so well. I don't remember if it was this live stream, or I was doing something last week, and so you can't see it, but on the back side of my monitors here is stairs that go down, and there's a door there. But my kids were playing with the dog right outside of that door, and we have a miniature schnauzer, and I don't know if you're familiar with that breed, but they love to bark.
Yes.
So while I don't think it came through because, the microphone is fairly good at noise rejection, but it was very distracting to me of hearing bark, bark, bark.
Yeah, no, I had a schnauzer growing up. So yeah, I'm familiar with the bark sound. And yeah, my mic could probably like auto detect and filter that probably pretty easily. My dog, my kids, not so much.
Let's see, that's all of our commands. I'm looking for our base 64. Come on.
You can do it.
I should have done a reverse. There we go. So we'll take this info and plug it in here. There's our ignition data. Yep, ready to complete. And then we will take, and if you saw, I got this guy. So we want to take this, but we want to modify it and just remove that EN01.
Mm-hmm.
Then we'll do our same govc command, but point it at the new one, which I believe I called bootstrap 2. Oops. Just to double check something assume.
It's already bit us once today.
I know. Okay, so now if we check here under our recent tasks, we should see the reconfigure virtual machine bootstrap 2. So let's turn this guy on and see what happens.
Doop 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 doop. He likes the
bio screen. Well, the bio screen, when you need it, when you want to access it, it goes by in the blink of an eye. When I don't care about it, it wants to spend 10 seconds here thinking about something.
Good stuff.
So it'll get there. I trust.
I believe in you.
I believe in it. Exactly.
I think I can. I think I can.
I believe and believe. So if you're a Ted Lasso fan.
Can't say I am.
We were talking about that before the show started as well. How you replaced your entire home network this past weekend. I just moved from Roku to Apple TV because
yes, and I was telling you how much of a good move that was.
It was time for me to replace the Roku because it's, I don't know, 4 years old or something, and it was a little flaky. So 5 years old maybe.
Wow.
So yeah, the Apple TV it's doing well, and conveniently I get a subscription to or a free month or whatever of Apple TV Plus. So
is that really all they're giving? It's just a month?
I don't remember what it was.
Okay, I was about to say, dang, like if you buy the TV box, you'd think they'd give you like a year or something. Who knows nowadays, though?
Come on, VMware.
You can do it, VMware.
My bootstrap machine broke the VMware environment.
Whoops, my bad.
I don't know what's happening here.
Nobody knows. What is going on here?
JP Dade, no more subscription services. I agree.
Too many.
It's I actually have a spreadsheet that I use to track which ones I'm currently subscribed to, and I try and keep my total cost of subscription services less than what I would pay for like cable TV.
Makes sense.
And it works out pretty well, and I just rotate through them periodically.
Yeah.
Yes, a lifetime subscription to the Twitch stream is free.
Yes, 100% free, as is YouTube, Periscope, and Facebook Live. Subscribe everywhere today.
So Christian is asking about resources. I don't think there are any. I don't know there shouldn't be anything affecting that. Everything is powered off here. It shouldn't be waiting on anything. Monitor is what I want. I mean, it's basically acting as though the VM has not started yet, which is quite strange. Oh, there we go. Because the ESXi host just went offline. And
oh, good.
So that's fun.
Oof.
Something HA event. Maybe now it'll start. It'll move to a different host and start.
Okay. Gotta love it when your hypervisor fails you.
Or not. Yeah, that's a new one.
Not responding. That's encouraging.
Yeah, it's effectively, it lost connection. The node could have failed. There it's back. Okay. So hopefully now it'll start. Anyways, so we've only got a couple of minutes left.
It's always
in
something.
theory, in principle, this works. At this point, I need to do it and make a video of it and publish
Right,
it on
like
YouTube.
I need you to prove it. I need you to prove that this works.
Just to prove to myself that this works. So
Show me the money.
Exactly. Yeah, launch to the web console. Come on.
You can.
Hey, there we
go. There we go.
So there now it's pulling down, installing CoreOS. Well, I say pulling down. It's not pixie booting. It's configuring CoreOS.
Right.
Expanding out the size of the drive and all that other stuff. So hopefully now we'll be able to see it go through and pull down its config information and go through and actually do the boot, assuming that our IP information took. So yeah, only a couple minutes left. Please feel free if you have any last minute questions. If we can address them before the top of the hour, we'll go ahead and tackle that. If not, or if you don't feel like you can get it in or want a more thorough answer, please feel free to reach out to either Chris or I. I'm on Twitter, Practical Andrew. Chris is the real Chris Short on Twitter. You can also send us an email.
I'm at Chris Short.
Oh, which one is the real Chris Short?
Who's the real? Sometimes I am the Chris Short.
Is that what it is?
Maybe, so there's a lot of Chris Shorts in tech. So we have to fight over names sometimes.
See, I'm terrible at the social media. Don't trust me.
No.
At Chris Short. At Chris Short, at Practical Andrew. You can also send us email, cshorts or andrew.sullivan@redhat.com. We'll hang out here, or I'll hang out here in the chat on the live stream to also help answer questions there. It appears that it has gone through at this point.
Looks like it's working. Yeah.
So it made it past where it was before. So I'm thinking it's good. And hopefully right about the top of the hour when we're about to drop, it'll pop up and it'll show us that little blurb at the top of the screen that has our IP address on it. Krager, yes. I also had the Eminem song in my head as I was saying that. So there we go.
There we go. There's your interface name. Look at that.
ENS 192.
You would not have guessed. You would not have guessed that.
Yeah, ENS 192, not EN01.
Yeah.
And it did adopt the IP address that we had configured, 6.20. So static IPs work without having to use the ISO. We set them as a VM property. You can use Go VC or Go C. Nice. You can set them through the GUI. You saw me browse to and view it. You can add a new entry for one of those just as easily. So if I edit settings, this is what I tried to do last week when I borked it.
Yep.
Go to advanced, go to edit configuration, and up here at the top, add configuration parameters. Just add that data in there. And you should be good, but doing stuff manually is so boring. It's so 2007.
That's true.
I don't know where I took that date from. I just randomly.
I think that was the last time I was a official vSphere administrator. Yeah. Anyways, all right. Well, this has been awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate you coming along for the ride here today. Up next is the OpenShift Commons briefing, all about operators. We'll be talking about which operator today is it? The Dynatrace operator. So some operators, observability, trying to get you a smarter Kubernetes platform. So yeah, tune in here in just a few minutes or a few seconds actually, and we'll be live.
And we'll be back next week, 11 a.m. Eastern, with another OpenShift Administrators office hours. So thank you to everybody who tuned in. Thank you for all of your questions. Again, please feel free to reach out at any time.
Yeah. Thank y'all. Have a great one.
one, Chris Shorts, go. Okay, it looks like we're rolling. We are happy to present another exciting, thrilling, and fun episode of the OpenShift Commons briefings here today. My name is Michael Waite. I have finally moved out of my cabin in northern New Hampshire, and I'm back in my home office for the first time in in 8 months. It kind of feels a little bit strange. But today we're happy to have Michael Villager here from Dynatrace. Michael Villager is their Senior Technical Partner Manager. Welcome, Michael. How are you today?
I'm doing terrific.
That's really good. Tell us a little bit about yourself. What is your role at Dynatrace? How long have you been there? What's your claim to fame over there at Dynatrace?
Yeah, so I've actually been with Dynatrace for almost 7 years now. So I'm a long timer. I was a customer for a couple of years before that. Originally, kind of brought over my background in cloud and big data. So I was a crazy person who decided to use APM solutions to understand what was going on with custom Java MapReduce. Like for folks that remember when Hadoop was a thing.
Right.
And one of the things that I did many years ago, for those of you on this call that are viewing the recording here that might remember OpenShift v2, I was the creator of the Dynatrace OpenShift v2 cartridge that actually allowed us to inject our Atmon agent into JBoss cartridges. For those who kind of remember the heady early days of OpenShift before it was Kubernetes based.
Yeah, I was going to say that I was going to ask you, say, hey, so do you have any experience with OpenShift, and what makes you that? So you already beat me to it. That was a long time ago. Things are certainly a lot different. I mean, we kind of really bet the farm on, you know, making the big switch to 100% Kubernetes, and I think that was the right choice because it's really starting to get, Kubernetes obviously has become, the mainstream way for doing these sort of things. So you put together when we were talking with your people at Dynatrace, we were like, hey, we want to have you guys come on and be a part of our show today, but we're not looking for really in the weeds demos of, okay, here, let me pull up a terminal window and let's edit this config file together and see how thrilling it is. And so you actually put together a discussion here, something involving Minecraft. Is that
Yep.
correct?
Yep. So I have a couple of different things that I'll be talking us through today. But given the context of the year and how it's been, a lot of folks like myself have been kind of spending time upgrading our home labs and finding interesting things to do to occupy ourselves when we can't really go anywhere anymore.
Right.
So this is this is one of the things that I did. And I
Well,
want to kind of talk to folks about the journey.
that's pretty cool. I would like to say that we are really happy to have Dynatrace on here, and thank you, Marcy, for lining up Michael Villager. I know that the content here is going to be pretty interesting. But the reason why we do this OpenShift Commons briefings and have companies like Dynatrace and others on here is because we at Red Hat have been working with Dynatrace for a long time to make sure that the Dynatrace software is fully tested and certified and supportable for the Red Hat platforms, and specifically, Red Hat OpenShift, because when customers want to put, their IT into production in a multi-cloud world, everyone wants to make sure that it works and it's supportable. So, kudos to Dynatrace for being one of our longtime partners, working with us to test and integrate their software with the OpenShift platform. I think that really helps customers be able to move POCs into production sooner and be more successful with better day two support and so forth. having said that, with my gratuitous plug for Dynatrace and how much we love you guys, why don't you get us started on the content that you have, Mike?
For sure. Thanks again. Thanks for the very kind words leading into this.
It's actually,
So,
I mean, it's easy, right? I mean, Dynatrace is probably one of our closer or closest software partners we work with. I mean, I bump into Marcy at just about every event we've ever been to. And, the cool thing about doing this, especially when we reached out to Marcy and said, hey, would you guys like to be part of our TV show? The answer is always yes. There's never like, well, let me think about it. It's like, yeah, we're on board. That sounds cool. So, Michael, why don't you talk us about your replatforming legacy packaged apps block by block with Minecraft, and let's see what you got.
yeah, for sure. So I'm going to just go ahead and kind of get into it here. And hopefully everybody's, seeing the screen. So just kind of an overview of what I'm going to talk about here. And again, like I mentioned before, this was kind of the genesis of a couple of months of work of some things that was kind of like my quarantine project to keep myself occupied when things were not looking all that great earlier in the year. And it was really kind of an interesting exercise.
Not that they're starting to look great now, Mike. I mean,
And that's why I think this is actually a really great talk for literally today, right? Because it's something that's going to be fun. It's going to be a little lighthearted. I'm going to go into the weeds just a little bit when I start talking about, the Kubernetes CPI and the CSI and stuff like that. But overall, it's basically like, how can I play a game with Kubernetes? Right, so it's a fun kind of topic that I think is going to be a little lighthearted, just given how chaotic everything is. However, while it is fun, I actually think it's relevant for some of the problems that folks are encountering now. When you are taking something that is perhaps a piece of commercial off the shelf software, and you're trying to run that in your OpenShift environment, right? So we're going to kind of talk a little bit about, my own internal modernization journey that I've taken over the many, many years that I've been providing a number of Minecraft instances to my friends to collaborate on. And then, moving all of that into OCP. And then kind of at the end, I'm going to talk about, tangentially related things around trying to procure hardware and stuff like that. When the worldwide supply chain was almost completely disconnected. So there's some fun little learnings there too, and maybe fun isn't the right word, but you'll find out more when we get to that, right?
Okay, sounds good.
All right. So why Minecraft as an example, right? It's Java based, which is terrific, but it's closed source, right? So this isn't a piece of open source software. One of the things that architecturally is really fascinating about Minecraft is it's a multiplayer game, but it's effectively single-threaded. All right. So what that means is everything that happens in the game is all attempting to happen in this 50 millisecond tick. The game is designed such that it tries to maintain this 20 tick per second tick rate. And everything that you need to do has to happen within that 50 milliseconds. And that includes all of the players on the server either placing or breaking blocks, what the blocks are doing, right? So is it a piece of glowstone that's lit up? Is it redstone logic that is, making machines do things? Is it something in modded Minecraft, which is crazy, and that's kind of what I'm talking about today. In modded Minecraft, you have things like computers that are inside of Minecraft running Lua script, right? Some crazy person created a mod that runs inside of the Minecraft JVM and actually spawns KVM virtual machines that you can control from inside of Minecraft. There's another mod out there that actually lets you administer your Kubernetes cluster from inside of Minecraft, representing pods as pigs and chickens and so on inside of the Minecraft instance. It's all totally fascinating. But But that same 50 millisecond tick also has to represent what all of the monsters and things like that in the game are doing. And I use monster to kind of mean, everything from, the typical skeletons and things like that you encounter at night, as well as all the, chickens and pigs and cows and stuff like that you might see during the day. One of the things that's really fascinating is with modded Minecraft, again, this is all this extra behavior that has to still occur inside of that 50 millisecond game tick, right? What happens if your actions take longer than 50 milliseconds is they start to back up and eventually they will be skipped. And sometimes this can get really bad and you might end up skipping several seconds worth of changes to the game world, right? So, if you're sitting here and you're down in a cave and you're breaking blocks to try and, to try and get to some diamonds or something like that, or gold, what's going to end up happening is the server will reset back to the state it was a couple of seconds ago, and all of a sudden, those blocks that you broke will reappear again, or the block that you placed will all of a sudden disappear. And it
happens.
Right? And folks complain about that as it's viewed as lag. It's a pretty common thing. Everybody knows about it. Everybody kind of gripes about it. The other interesting thing here as well is that this is this is kind of sort of almost a worst case example for modernization, because there's really significant persistent disk requirements here. So the Minecraft world itself is like several gigs, and the access to that data needs to be pretty low latency, and then you need some place to put backups as well, which are also pretty large. So it's all, you could almost think of it maybe as a little bit more analogous to, something like a database, as opposed to, something that's perhaps a more modern application, right? So I thought it was a really great kind of example of, how to modernize something, how to replatform something where you can't actually adjust the code, and something that really barely holds it together to begin with, right? So what were my early steps towards modernization? All right. So the first things that I did way back when, this was, a project that I undertook many, many years ago to stand up a file server in my basement. I was like, okay, as many other technologists do, I had, probably 10 or 12 years worth of, old defunct desktops that I was using as, quote unquote servers that were either sitting in a closet or in my basement. And I decided that I wanted to consolidate all of those onto one server that was like real server hardware, a Xeon CPU, ECC memory, all that kind of good kind of server enterprise things. So I built myself a server that I ran in my basement, and I had my Minecraft workload running as a virtual machine, and I was using ZFS as my file system, and I was using a number of, traditional hard drives to store that data, right? And this worked for a couple of years, but as modded Minecraft started to get worse and worse, and all of the things that they were starting to slam into that, all of those things that were trying to happen in that 50 millisecond game loop, it just wasn't working out, right? This is a common error message that you would see when something like that happened, right? You'd see this error message in the log saying, can't keep up. Did the time change, or is the server overloaded, right? And the answer is the server is always overloaded, right? And in this case, when I mentioned before, the server was actually almost 24 seconds behind what was actually supposed to be happening. So when it realizes that, yeah, sorry.
When you say ZFS, we had some people who were like throwing in some kudos to that, but like, what do you mean by spinning rust? I mean, like
that's traditional hard drives.
Oh,
right. So when we talk about spinning rust, we're basically talking about traditional hard drive, because the platters are metal,
yeah.
right? And if hard drive actually rusts, that's probably bad. I don't know how that would actually happen, but what you kind of sort of jokingly refer to, old-fashioned hard drives as spinning rods.
I just was thinking maybe your basement was really wet and there was like puddles of water and you were off in a corner sweeping spider webs and
Yeah, well, all those things are definitely happening. But again, this is a more traditional phrase to refer to our old-fashioned hard drive, right?
Gotcha.
So obviously, my basement is not a real climate-controlled data center with like Halon and all that other fancy stuff. So it's a worst-case scenario. Literally having the vacuum bugs out of the servers every once in a while because it's warm and they like to go there. Anyways.
Yeah.
Kind of it as I mentioned, but this is like a real example of when things bog down, the user experience is terrible because it's like the whatever you did for the last 24 seconds just didn't happen, right? It just rewinds that and then starts over again. And when you're in a situation like this where your hardware can't keep up, it's just going to happen over and over again, and that user experience is terrible, right? So I needed to move on from the virtual machine approach, right? So Docker started to be a thing that people were talking about. And I'm like, okay, well, Docker is a nice thing to do here because it's still going to allow me to sort of kind of isolate things from the underlying host, because I really didn't want this to be running on the actual host itself because I had people from the public internet connecting into my Minecraft instance. And with the game, so it's not necessarily the same type of standards that you might have for a real piece of enterprise software when it comes to security. JVM does a pretty good job of handling some of that, but for the most part, it was not something that I wanted running pure bare metal. All right, but Docker got me to close to bare metal performance. There is a little bit of overhead that is arguable and discussed quite frequently on the internet, but Docker allowed me to have the isolation and allowed me to have near bare metal performance. And then it was a lot easier for me to allow the Minecraft instance to have access to an SSD that I had in the server, and then also what I now consider slow ZFS storage that I had in that server as well, right? So it allowed me to take the world itself, run that on an SSD with all the great benefits of that. But then it allowed me to use the slower and cheaper hard drives for backup, right? So I will mention as well, again, running things via Docker, fairly traditional, type of implementation there. But I do want to kind of make a joke, poke fun at myself. Like this, it's a really old way to do this because I was still using byte mounts because this was something that I did before we even had volumes in Docker, right? So again, as I started looking into this and kind of starting my project and realizing that I was still experiencing a lot of those kind of issues in the environment, even when I had that close to bare metal performance, with Docker, I was still having problems. My users were complaining that there was lag. Anytime I had more than 2 people on the server at once, it was still a pretty bad experience. So I dropped Dynatrace on it. One of the nice things about working for Dynatrace is I can actually deploy Dynatrace in my home lab. And when we started kind of seeing the explosion of Docker, having the one agent on the underlying host allowed me to automatically monitor everything that was running as a Docker container without having to figure out, how to add one agent to the container file system and all that other garbage. It basically just worked, which was nice. I didn't have to mess with it, right? But this, basically what I did here is kind of, I guess you could consider this step 2. I don't know, but I assessed my current states to kind of see, what's the footprint of my modded Minecraft instance, right? And this is the same thing that you would kind of do if you're looking to move a piece of more traditional software. And I could see that I was pretty much consuming an entire core just about 24/7, in a 12-core machine that's about 6 to 8%. And then we can see as well that the memory utilization is crazy. And even with that much memory allocated, we still have some pretty significant GC pauses on occasion as well, right? So we're using almost 10 gigs of memory and an entire core of a 12-core CPU, right? So I had a good understanding. Sorry.
Oh no, is that because it's single threaded, so it wasn't being distributed across all the cores?
That is exactly correct. Great observation there. Yeah, so definitely it's single threaded. So it will occasionally use more than a core because occasionally there are things that actually run outside of the main tick thread. But for the most part, it's that main tick thread that uses all the time, right?
Yeah.
So the next thing that I wanted to do is I wanted to actually understand how long a tick actually takes, right? And this is kind of a fascinating process with something like Minecraft, because again, looking at this like we would with a piece of commercial off the shelf software, we're not going to have access to the source code, right? And it's even worse with Minecraft because all of the functions and classes and things like that are actually obfuscated, right? Because Mojang didn't want folks to actually easily understand what was going on here. But because Minecraft became so popular with the modding community around changing how Minecraft operated and adding all this extra functionality to it, there's the mod coder pack, right? Which actually on a regular basis exports a CSV of de-obfuscated function names and things like that. And then additionally, I was able to use Dynatrace to actually crack CPU utilization, right, on a kind of method by method basis. And I was able to find that this, function underscore 71217p was pretty significant when it comes to CPU consumption. And then cross-referencing that with the mod coder pack, I found that, yes, that was basically the best representation of the master tick thread, right? So again, using Dynatrace, then I could basically tell Dynatrace, hey, normally our transactions start with some sort of web request, right? That's what the most modern architectures are doing. But here's an example of something that isn't actually speaking HTTP, right? So I define an entry point manually based on that, function 7127.217p, right? And now Dynatrace is going to say every time I iterate a new tick, that's a new transaction, right? So that allows me to, better understand the response time for those ticks and understand that transaction rate there, right? And we can actually see very easily here in this environment that those slowest 5% of ticks were pretty darn close to 50 milliseconds literally all the time, right? So regardless of whether or not anybody was even on the server, we were pretty close to that 50 millisecond point all the time, right? So something had to be done. I had to, move this forward to some more modern hardware, right? So, what better choice than something like OpenShift Container Platform, right? I wanted the advantage of Kubernetes, right? I wanted a good excuse to update my home lab. I wanted to move forward from a pretty darn old Xeon to take a look at, our new Epic Rome CPUs, which everybody was kind of talking about. It was the new hotness at the beginning of the year. Wasn't able to go with ARM because I need quite a bit more, memory footprint and things like that. And I still wanted to stay in the x86 family here. So I ended up with, yeah, sorry.
My question for you, I noticed when you were listing out, your operating systems that you were using, earlier on, you listed, Ubuntu as an upstream project. Why wouldn't you use native Kubernetes for this as opposed to OpenShift?
Well, that's a great question. I'm actually using OpenShift because kind of my job to investigate the capabilities of OpenShift, as opposed to some of the other Kubernetes offerings. I've made my scenario work today on other Kubernetes offerings. But one of the things that I found fascinating about the process of getting this up and running on OpenShift, and I'll actually get to that in a couple of other slides. One of the things that I found fascinating was kind of how OpenShift is secure by default and kind of forces you to take it to do some best practices, right? And I actually found that out the hard way in a few slides when I actually kind of talk about my new Docker file. I found that what worked on other Kubernetes flavors actually didn't work on OCP. And that's because I wasn't following best practices.
Oh.
Right. So, yeah, sorry.
We are starting to get some questions coming in. Do you want to hold all questions to the end, or
I would love to take questions. I actually just can't see them when I'm in presentation mode.
I got this one here. So Justin asked a question a couple minutes ago. He'd be very curious if any JVM optimization comes out of this to get rid of GC and heap size hog.
Yep. So that's a great question. Where I am at now with it is the result of some pretty hefty optimization efforts just in order to get it to run on my old hardware that I haven't revisited. Additionally, the modded Minecraft community tends to focus on older versions of Minecraft. So, for example, this is still Java 8, right? So I can't take advantage of some of the new GC capabilities and the newer JVMs. However, folks in the community have found some pretty good performance improvements moving to alternative JVMs. Right now I'm using, OpenJDK. And so one of the things that, if time allows in the future, is I want to kind of look at some of the other JVMs that have been known to work to see if some of those improve things. I seem to recall somebody saying that like Graal, for example, actually works really well for that.
Okay, just one last one, then I'll stop interrupting. Chris wants to know, or Washari wants to know, is Michael using OCP on Ubuntu? Which version, et cetera, et cetera?
Ubuntu is the old platform, right? That's the old platform. So now that I'm using OCP, right, I'm using OCP on vSphere, right? And I'm kind of talking about some of these things here because one of the things that I really found fascinating will be my next slide, where I talk about how to get OCP running really nicely on top of vSphere. But since it's OCP, I've deployed 4.5.11 with the installer, right? So it's still CoreOS under the covers. Right. So Ubuntu is not a part of this this particular deployment anymore. It's all Red Hat all the time, except for the vSphere part. But we'll get to that
part. Yeah. Okay.
Cool. Awesome. All right. So when it came time to build out this fancy schmancy new home lab, which again is it's a beefy home lab. I'm not gonna lie. But I wanted to take advantage of vSAN because the vSAN kind of felt familiar to me based on, again, that kind of Hadoop experience of keeping the compute and storage together. So I kind of wanted to experiment with so-called hyperconverged infrastructure, right? And I wanted to do all flash vSAN because it's 2020, so let's take spinning Rust out of the picture. And I was able to source, vSphere is pretty particular about the hardware you use. It complains pretty heavily if you use something that's not on the hardware compatibility list. So I wanted to be certain that at the very least, with all flash vSAN, you basically have a cache drive and what's effectively the storage drive, right? And I wanted to make sure at the very least that the cache tier was on the HCL. So I was able to find some used Intel SSD on eBay, and then I used kind of garbage tier SSDs for the capacity tier. And vSphere complains about it, but it actually worked. And it was also an opportunity to upgrade to 10 gigabit networking, which I'm going to talk about a little later too, because that was not without its challenges, right? So I've got this fancy schmancy vSAN cluster, right? So now I want to run OCP on it. And this is where things kind of get fascinating, because I think we're at a unique kind of threshold or crossroads here. I don't know if I want to say crossroads, but the Kubernetes community is kind of at an interesting point, because every Kubernetes deployment is going to have a CPI. That's the cloud provider interface. That's what allows Kubernetes to work with all the underlying pieces of your IaaS, right? That's how it, worked with, the storage and all that kind of other thing, right? So now we have this fascinating time where you have the in-tree CPI, which is what part of core Kubernetes, and you have the out-of-tree CPI, which is something that's provided by the cloud provider, right? So in this case, VMware has their own out-of-tree CPI, which allows them to control the release cadence, right? So it's not governed by the release cadence of Kubernetes itself. It's actually managed by VMware. So they kind of control, when a new release happens, and they can either do that, faster or slower than upstream Kubernetes, right? And then with that out-of-tree CPI, now you have this new container storage interface, right? So this is kind of a new way of abstracting the storage from the container orchestrator, right? And that works hand in hand with the CPI to basically provision storage, right? So when I need a Kubernetes volume and I want to dynamically allocate that, the CSI now is what's going to handle talking to vSphere and creating that new piece of storage and mounting that on all the nodes, right? So this is kind of the new fancy way to do this with, was it vSphere 6.7 U3 and beyond, I think it is. I'm using vSphere 7, but this is basically, then you're actually going to see all those volumes in the vSphere UI as well. And vSphere will tell you, which pod, a lot of information around how that storage is being mounted inside of Kubernetes. So it's kind of a great integration piece there. And it really works really well inside of OCP, right? So it's not something that's in OCP out of the box. Again, because VMware is responsible kind of for distributing the CPI and the CSI, but it's a fairly trivial process to get this up and running. I was actually expecting it to be more difficult than it was, because I had attempted to do this with another Kubernetes offering like 7 or 8 months ago. And it was something that I had a lot of difficulty with. But luckily, the community has been all over getting the new out-of-tree CPI working inside of OCP. So I found some great instructions that I've linked to here. I did have to make a couple of changes to the underlying VMs, because the OpenShift installer creates VMs with kind of an older compatibility mode for vSphere. I think it was version 13, I think sounds right. So I had to upgrade that. And then there's also kind of a toggle that you need to enable for all the VMs, which, that UUID just kind of gives a little bit more context around which VM is mounting which piece of storage everywhere. And then it's just a couple of, OC commands to create secret, to apply some manifests, creating some roles and all those fascinating things, and then a controller and a daemon set. And then basically you're giving it your vSphere information, and then that allows this new out-of-tree CPI to talk to vSphere to provision the things that you need in your cluster, right? Again, so now that I've got the out-of-tree CPI deployed and I have access to the new vSphere CSI, it allows me to kind of create new storage classes, right? So I create 2 storage classes, one that's the vSAN Flash, and one that's my old Spinning Rust ZFS exported via NFS via vSAN. So that's obviously not super performant. But you can see here that it's pretty simple to roll this out. You basically just give it the data store URL and you're good to go, right? But I do want to call something out here pretty specifically, right? So when you're defining these storage classes, you want to make sure that you're using this new provisioner, right? csi.vsphere.vmware.com, because if you use the kubernetes.io one, that's still going to work with OCP, but that's not going to be using the new CSI stuff, right? You want to make sure that that you're using this new one. And one of the interesting things is this is all still new enough that sometimes you'll find instructions referring to the old way as opposed to the new way, right? And that's the great thing about technology is if you Google things, you can find all sorts of conflicting answers. So you have to kind of use your head once in a while, right? So obviously then, you know, what I was able to do here is created a couple of PVCs, right? The PVCs are what's going to allow those volumes to get created dynamically because ain't nobody got time to pre-provision storage. That just sounds crazy to me, and that's not why I moved to Kubernetes. So this allows me to basically just let all that underlying tech provision the storage for me. I just tell Kubernetes what I need, right? I need 20 gigs of fast storage, and I need 100 gigs of slow storage. Kubernetes, you go figure that out for me. And it did. It was great, right? So those persistent volumes, they get mounted as volumes in my deployment, right? So in my manifest for my app, I just say, hey, take that world claim, which was the fast storage, and mount that as the Minecraft data volume. And I want you to put that in home Minecraft Animatica 2 world, right? That's actually old. I thought I changed that, but I had actually moved that mount path to /data/Animatica 2. And you'll see that when I show my new Docker file here in a second. But so basically what's going to happen here is the same way that I did things in Docker, I've now basically got this storage that needs to be persistent mounted at that file system path inside of my pod, right? Right. So again, as you mentioned and asked me earlier, like, you know, why use OCP for this stuff? One of the other really interesting things that I encountered as I was kind of going through this is, you know, what I had done and what I had experimented with on some other Kubernetes distributions didn't actually work in OCP. And that's because, you know, so many things are kind of secure by default with OCP. I had a lot of, you know, file system errors due to the way that a random UID gets assigned to the process that's running inside of the container. So I had to fight that a little bit. And I'm sure there maybe is a better way to do this, but what I did is I just 775 all the files that my process needs to have access to, and that kind of got me through it. But as a part of this, you know, again, revisiting my Docker file actually resulted in me, you know, having some other best practices and so on. And I went from, don't laugh at me, I went from a 1.8 gig Docker file or, you know, Docker image down to a 600 meg Docker image. And 600 megs is about as good as it's going to get because the unzipped server files are actually about that big. And again, this is something where, you know, I'm actually using the upstream OpenJDK image. And as I kind of experiment with some other, you know, JVMs and things like that, I might start to experiment with that a little bit more. But for now, this works, and simple is best when it comes to things like that, right? And then if we look at the deployment in full, there's a couple of interesting things that I kind of want to call out here, right? This is a monolith that you can't scale it out. Like if we went back, you know, we'd see that the PVC is read write once, and that's because we can't have multiple processes writing to the same storage. It's, you know, basically one replica and that's it. We can't scale this one out. You can scale it up, which is kind of sort of what I did here by getting some new hardware, but you can't scale that out and add instances, right? And I'd love, sorry, yeah.
Pardon me, Michael. Frank had a question about storage. He wanted to know, is there a command to query the available storage provisions in an OCP cluster, storage provisioners?
Oh yeah. I mean, you can actually do an OC get SD to actually list the storage classes. You can do the same thing to get the persistent volume as well. Or if you're old-fashioned, or maybe a little bit more used to kube control, you can do the same thing with kube control.
And I would also say I'm not an OCP expert by any stretch of the means, but I do work at Red Hat, and Michael Waite, it's just Waite at redhat.com, WAITE at redhat.com. I can get you connected with just about anyone you'd ever want to talk to on the OpenShift team. So
awesome. Great. Well, I may not have some questions as a result of things that I've kind of experienced throughout this as well.
That was for the attendees, Michael. You're going to have to go through Marcy. Sorry.
Okay, that's fine too. Yep. And obviously I'm making all my own friends at Red Hat as well. So like, talking to Kevin Bear and things like that. So I'm sure I can get my own answers. Right. So as I look at my my deployment manifest here, there's a couple of other things that I can improve. Some of the environment variables might be nice to be in a config map or something like that, or maybe even as a secret, because for example, the default op is sort of kind of secret. Like maybe that would be better served in a secret. One of the other interesting things that I had to do recently as well was you'll see this manifest is actually just kind of a standard Docker Hub type of image. I did move to temporarily move to Harbor because I have a Harbor instance running in my basement, but I think I might make that an image stream as well, just due to all the changes that have happened with Docker and only being able to fetch a certain number of images per hour or whatever it is, and if things don't get accessed in a while, they get deleted. So I'm kind of experimenting with some other ways to deal with that. So I did use Harbor as I was rapidly iterating over this. The very first image that I created was 1.77 with no letter. So obviously the fact that I'm on F now means that I had to iterate over my images a couple of times before I got something that I liked the way it worked. Right? All right, awesome. So now I've got that manifest all set up, and then I basically get a JVM that nobody can access from outside of the cluster. And since this is a multiplayer game server, by itself, it's not really doing anything valuable without being able to connect to it. So I experimented with a couple of different things here, but our kind of normal ingress controllers with HA proxy and stuff like that don't necessarily make sense here because Minecraft is an HTTP, so it's not really going to work that way. I'm deploying this to my basement, so it's not sitting on GCP, AWS, Azure, and so on. So I don't have a real load balancer yet. I'm sort of kind of thinking about trying to buy an F5 from eBay or something like that, but I don't have a real load balancer yet. So I use MetalLB. MetalLB is pretty much the kind of thing that folks use in this type of scenario. As I got through what I was doing here, I did find that somebody at Red Hat built an operator to manage this. And that was actually something that I didn't see until yesterday evening. So I'm actually looking to perhaps rip out what I've done here and replace it with that. But for now, I've got MetalLB set up to use a bunch of IPs from my private LAN, and then I just provision access to those via NAT on my home's router. I do want to call one thing out because I get to do these types of talks quite a bit, which gives me an opportunity to hop on a soapbox. And you know how much people in tech like to get on soapboxes. Don't actually do this. I included this as an example, but I really, really hate when people just kube control apply a file directly from GitHub or a file from the internet or piping curl to back or whatever. We always include that in our directions as like tech companies and so on. But what we really hope is somebody actually downloads that file and looks at it first before they apply it to their cluster.
Yeah.
Right. So I've got that, it's written this way for, to make things nice and concise. Right. But let's not actually do this anymore. Like, it's just not good. All right. So again, as I mentioned before, I've got that load balancer available, making those requests to Minecraft available via a private IP. So then I just use my Ubiquiti edge router to provide access to that port via NAT. And if anybody has any questions about Ubiquiti hardware, please let me know as well, as everybody is doing the same thing as me and upgrading their home networks. Some of my friends at VMware have started to do this with Ubiquiti hardware, and I'm a huge fan. So I'll leave that one out there as well. Right. So one of the other things we'll talk about here, and we're almost done, is Kubernetes requests and limits. Right. So as we take a legacy application and we want to move it into a cluster like this that is hopefully going to be doing more than just running something like Minecraft, you want to make sure that all these things live together nicely, and you want to make sure that Kubernetes is able to place the workloads on the nodes that can actually support that workload, right? So one of the fascinating things here, especially since a lot of other folks have been using the quarantine to build clusters of Raspberry Pis and things like that, since Minecraft requires so much memory, I've got to go out there and I've got to say, hey, I need at least 11 gigs. And I want to limit this to 12, right? So what that means is if my cluster of all my worker nodes are 8 gig worker nodes, this will never deploy because the scheduler is never going to find a node to run it on. So I needed to have, extra large worker nodes here. The nice thing about the OpenShift installer is the default node size is perfect here, right? Because the default node size is, I think, 4 cores and 16 gigs of memory. That was perfect for my needs, right? The interesting thing then when we start to talk about requests, right, which is what the scheduler uses to place workloads versus limits, is if you have your limit set in a certain way, if you have your memory limit set and you exceed that, it's going to kill your pod, right? If your CPU limit is hit, it's just going to slow it down, right? The nice thing here is that obviously, again, I work for Dynatrace, so I'm using Dynatrace in my Kubernetes environment. I'm actually utilizing our Red Hat certified operator to monitor these workloads. And with that one deployment into my cluster, I can now monitor this the same way that I did back in the Docker world. And now I can also track my CPU throttling, right? So if I got...
How is that operator working out? Is that a Helm chart or is that a real operator? Or
technically, it's both, because there is a Helm chart that will deploy the operator, right? So it's hurdles all the way down, and what that operator is going to do for us is just the traditional operator benefits, right? Of codifying all that knowledge around deploying one agent to a Kubernetes cluster. And again, to what you talked about kind of in the beginning, Dynatrace has been working really closely with Red Hat kind of since day one of the operator framework.
right.
And it has been jointly certified and it's jointly supported by both of our organizations. But what the operator is doing is it's actually rolling the one agent out to all your worker nodes, right? And once the one agent is on the worker node, it's going to automatically inject into every application, every pod on that OCP environment. Right. Cool.
That makes for configuration management a lot easier. So you don't, especially on the larger the clusters get, right?
Oh, for sure. For sure. There's no need to mess with, sidecars or, pumping APM agents into your Docker file or any of those other kind of shenanigans. It's just there, part of the platform watching everything. Right. And again, what's fascinating about this is just because the application doesn't speak HTTP, we can monitor that too. right? You just have to tell it what represents the transaction, right? But in this context as well now, I'm able to validate that my replatforming efforts were successful and that I've set these limits to a sane value, because I can start to see if there's CPU throttling occurred, right? So in this particular screenshot, I can see that there was quite a bit of CPU throttling occurring, right? So that's what kind of got me to the point where I was starting to bump that limit up, right? Because based on what I saw earlier, I was like, oh, okay, like a core and a half should be fine. So it was set to 1500M, but I needed to increase that to 2 entire cores. All right, so the current state, everything is great. I've got a nice little chart there at the bottom. That's the master tick thread response time for the new environment in teal. I think that is. I'm not great with colors. And then the orange one is the old instance. Now the old instance doesn't have anybody on it anymore, so that's basically 15 milliseconds with nobody on it. And the new instance down below was like 7.5. 5 to 7.5 milliseconds with a handful of folks on it, right? And then I'm going to be alerted by Dynatrace if that response time is ever degraded. And then I can do cool things like, dive into the methods that are part of the master tick thread that are causing trouble. Like, for example, I did have a problem a couple of weeks ago, and I was able to use Dynatrace to find out that the root cause of my problem was frog. I had frogs in my Minecraft world that were added by a mod called Quark. And for whatever reason, the AI responsible for governing the frog behavior was acting up, and it was taking like 80% of that master tick thread. So as the Minecraft admin, I had to hop onto my server and kill all the frogs in the entire world. So that was kind of an interesting kind of example. Right. So, we've only got a couple of minutes left here because we've got a couple of great questions kind of along the way. Some of the things that were fascinating about this whole process was sourcing hardware. I started this effort, kind of back in March, and sourcing hardware when all this stuff was going down back at the beginning of the year was really difficult. And even though I was buying like real legit server grade hardware, I still had a fascinating amount of hardware problems. Like I had a DOA CPU that took a month and a half to get a replacement. I actually had unrelated, I had a CPU socket that actually melted, taking yet another CPU with it. And for the first time in 20 years, I had bad cabling that was negatively impacting things. And oddly enough, it was not cables that I built. It's actually cables that were pre-made. So 10 gigabit networking, even for like a short 2-meter cable, was still really picky about cable quality. And then again, I want to call this out. This is my Docker file, right? There's many Docker files out there, but this one is mine. It's probably not the best. There actually is a Red Hat example about this that I found, and it uses this itsg Minecraft server Docker file. And itsg also has some more generic ways of deploying Minecraft as a stateful set and so on. But he's got some weird things going on in his Docker file, and I wanted to kind of simplify to the max. So I wanted something that I would definitely understand throughout the process. But I will probably migrate this to that Docker file because it's a lot more advanced and it has some capabilities that I'm missing, right? If anybody has any questions about this or wants to hop on the Discord where I have the server information, please DM me on Twitter at Mike Villager. We've got a couple of different kind of Red Hat related call to actions here. The cool thing about Dynatrace is Dynatrace and Red Hat have been working together very closely for quite some time now. So we are listed on the Red Hat Marketplace. So you can initiate a free trial via the Marketplace, or you can buy Dynatrace via the Marketplace as well. The link on the left is a white paper that we've kind of created that's similar to what I talked about here today. And it's about, how Dynatrace can help you accelerate your migration to OpenShift. And then we've got a customer story available on the right, where we talk about some of the things that we were able to do to help the modernization efforts at Porsche, which is a brand that I'm a big fan of. And that is the end of my content.
Well, I have a question for you, Michael.
Of course.
We've got a minute and a half left. So what if someone doesn't work at Dynatrace and they don't have access to a beefy home lab, kind of like, what you've illustrated, how you put together? How do people re-platform their apps?
I mean, so there's a couple of key kind of like in a 90-second overview here, like just the real high-level points. So you want to monitor your existing application to understand what the footprint of that app is, and also, if possible, understand the dependencies for that application, right? And then have some place to put the app, right? And then you want to make sure that you are utilizing something, hopefully Dynatrace, to understand that effort has not been for naught. That things are actually working great throughout that replatforming or migration process. Because if you kind of go through this effort and end up pissing all your users off, like that's really no fun for anybody. Not sure if I answered that question, but
I think that's fairly good. I mean, I kind of sprung that on you here with literally seconds left, but I just kind of wanted to toss that one in there. This has been really cool. So again, if people want to get connected with your Minecraft instance, you want them to reach out to you on Twitter?
Yep, that's at Mike Villager, and it's VILLIGER. So it's like Village, but it's an I, not an A.
All right. Well, hey, this has been probably one of the more unique shows we've done here. I thank you so much for putting that together, and I don't even want to ask, what your investment is in your home lab, but
yeah, don't tell my wife either.
No. Anyways, thanks for coming. Sorry you had to go in there and kill all the frogs, but someone had to do it, and
To make an omelet, you got to kill some frogs.
It is life. Thanks again, Michael Villager from Dynatrace, being here on our OpenShift Commons Briefings Operator Hours show. My name's Mike Waite, and we're going to close it out here for the day. And thanks everyone for coming.
Bye.